You're Free to Go is sponsored by Milburn Men's Clothing, where top athletes shop for sharp, tailored style. And whether Mark and I are in the studio or the courtroom, Milburn dresses us for success. Mention YFTG and get 10% off at Milburn Men's Clothing, which has been providing the finest in men's clothing and suits since 1946. Call 651-645-2922 or visit www.milburn.com. Welcome back to Your Free to Go, your favorite podcast. We always appreciate you tuning into our show. And, you know, we were thinking that Mark and I realized that we wouldn't have all these great stories to share with you if it wasn't for all our clients who over the years have trusted us, which is such an honor on our behalf. They've trusted us with their freedom. We wouldn't have these great stories if it weren't for the judges that we've been in front of and the prosecutors we've dealt with and witnesses and so forth. So we're just very grateful for the career we've had and that we now have this opportunity to share it with the world. So I just want to take this moment to tell our viewers, Mark, how thankful and grateful we are for the careers we've had and that we're now having the opportunity to share everything with them. Mark, I think today, I know you have a really great case you want to start out with, so let's jump into it right now.
Well, this is what I would call fish out of water. In fact, I have two of them, but we'll save the other one. Fish out of water, obviously, somebody, in this case my client, who found himself in a place, in a jurisdiction, in a situation where he certainly didn't fit in. Now, you know, like you, I've handled cases all over the country in some very cosmopolitan areas, and in some areas that not only did my clients stand out as a foreigner, so did I.
Right, hard to get a jury of your peers in those communities.
Not to mention, you know, I've never quite lost my New York accent, so it certainly comes up in certain places. But this is a story about a fellow, we'll call him Ralph. And Ralph, at one point in his career, had been a professional golfer. A brilliant golfer, the kind of player who on a weekend, without any pressure, he would just tear up a course, shoot in the low 60s.
I can do that like on 3 holes, but not 18, that's for sure.
And, you know, he set a lot of course records. He joined the Pro Tour, but never really finished in the money. And it's interesting because I asked him, I said, you know, you're such an incredible golfer. How come you're not at the top of these leaderboards? Right. He says, because at that level of play, it's a mental game.
Right. Yeah.
He said the pressure, you've got sponsors, you're trying to make a living, and in some instances when you play in tournaments where it's TV coverage, it's a whole different game.
Yeah, they say it's between the ears.
That's right.
That's the difference between a champion in golf, you know, or top 50 player in golf, between the ears, and the other guys who are just as talented, but when they get in the competition, they just can't score the low rounds.
That's right.
Yeah.
So in any event, after years of doing that, he finally realized it just wasn't working for him. So he left the Pro Tour, went back to school, and got his license as a pharmacist. A bright guy, and he decides he gets a license in the state of Florida, decides to open a pharmacy up in the middle of Florida, north of Orlando, and in a county there, and he picks a town that has an Italian-sounding name. He's Italian descent. Of course, that town really wasn't that Italian. In fact, their idea of Italian food was ketchup on spaghetti.
No,
but
that was probably a disappointment for him.
Yes. In any event, he opens up this pharmacy, and adjacent to the pharmacy, because it was part of the building he rented, was like a little luncheonette cafeteria. And he would run this, and it was starting to become a very profitable business. But he got under the radar of the local sheriff because he was handing out certain drugs that were, you know, supposed to be by prescription to some of the local women of the night.
Okay.
Specifically penicillin.
Right.
I mean, I guess one could argue he was doing a community service.
Right. Yeah. I think anyone could really argue that, but it was
But
still,
in any event, there was bad blood between him and the local sheriff's department. And I guess they turned the whole thing over to the state pharmacy board, and they had an investigator, an older lady, who would come out, and she would bust his chops and she demanded all these records, and it got to the point that she was threatening to close him down.
Wow.
And it was getting really, really bad, and she was always making him turn over records, and he felt victimized by her. And it got to the point that he started telling people how he hated this woman. And the sheriff's department decided to put an undercover in his circle of friends. And one night he's drinking at a bar, and he's getting pretty wasted. And this guy who was undercover, we'll call him, starts talking to him and saying, and my client is, Ralph is saying how much he hates her, and he wished she would go away. And the undercover then at that point took that as an opportunity to say, look, I can take care of her.
Oh, no. And look, and let's tell our audience, police are allowed to do that as part
Absolutely.
of investigation, and they do it all the time, right? They insert someone into an investigation like that.
And needless to say, what my client responded with, expressing how he felt, not probably what he really wanted to do, but of course at that time he was under the influence of alcohol. He said, yeah, sure, and next thing you know, he's arrested for conspiracy to murder.
Wow. And she was an officer, or?
She was a state inspector. I forget her exact title.
That certainly enhances the punishment and the crime.
Oh,
It's
no.
like an official.
It was really bad.
Yep.
And so here he is in jail. And I get a call. I forget who referred the matter. And I go up to see him. And then I go over to the courthouse to meet the prosecutor. This is where it gets a little unique, to say the least. I go to see the prosecutor, and I see the name on the door, James Wyatt Earp.
Oh, James.
And then we're talking, a wonderful guy, great, a real pleasure. As you and I know, as defense attorneys, more often than not, we get along with our opponents. It's kind of different than civil cases.
Very, very different. There's a lot of animus between civil attorneys.
Right. But in the criminal thing, with one or two exceptions in my 50 years of practice, I get along with everybody, and I'm sure you do too.
Do too. In fact, often I'll tell the client before going into court that, hey, if you see me, having conversation with the prosecutor, laughing, joking, don't take that the wrong way. It benefits you, but the reality is we have great relationships with prosecutors inside the courtroom and outside the courtroom.
Yeah, I mean, look,
doesn't mean we're not being adversarial.
No, we bang each other on the head inside the courtroom, but doing it the right way. And then outside the courtroom, we can be friendly. And sometimes our clients take offense at that because they think we're selling them out or we're not going to fight as hard. But that's not the truth. The truth is, it's just, in fact, as a practical matter, it makes more sense to be able to get along because there's sometimes you have to rely on the discretion of the other person. In any event, so I have Mr. Earp as my prosecutor. But then I find out who our judge is.
And who's that?
John W. Booth.
You can't make this shit up. Oh, my God.
When I meet Mr. Earp and I go to shake his hand and introduce myself, I couldn't help myself.
Right.
So I went, Bat Masterson. Now, for some of our younger viewers here, they may not know who that is. But it's another famous member of the whole Western lore.
Right. Yep.
Anyway,
John Wayne days.
Yes. Anyway, it was an interesting case. We continued with the case, fighting it for a long time. And then the opportunity, what happened is I think they began to see on the prosecution side, I took some depositions. And out of these depositions, you could see that Ralph had never said anything like that before. There was no real proof of what we call predisposition.
And was this? I know it was a while ago, but nowadays they put cameras everywhere, and the cops are wearing cameras. Was it recorded back then, or no?
No, it wasn't recorded.
So was the undercover officers?
No, the undercover officer wore what we called a kell, which was a taping device, but it was not
video recorded.
Not video.
No
recorded.
video. Right.
So what happened is we maintained the defense of entrapment. Now, I don't know if we would have prevailed in front of a jury, especially a jury there.
Right, and I think in the history of the U.S., only a handful of cases have prevailed on the entrapment argument.
Right.
It's a very, very high burden and difficult to prove.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but we made enough headway, and this is what we've gotten our readers to understand, is sometimes fighting the case to the end gives you a little bit of leverage in working out a disposition that your client can live with. And as it turns out, we worked out a disposition where he pled to a felony, but got a withheld adjudication.
Wow, that's
Which
unheard of.
means no record of conviction.
Yeah.
Then it switches over into another arena, which is fighting to keep his license.
Right, sure.
Now, I didn't represent him in that because that's not what I do, but I worked in conjunction with another attorney, and lo and behold, they were able to keep his license. He was on some kind of probationary period for it, and to my knowledge, he's still a practicing pharmacist.
Wow. You saved his you saved his freedom and his career.
So he was basically free to go. Didn't do any time.
Right.
Does not have a record of a felony conviction.
Amazing work. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was great, a great opportunity. But the lesson that he learned from that, and the lesson that I learned from that, was when you're the new kid in town or you're a fish out of water.
Right.
He was a New York Italian guy up in the middle of BF, Florida. You got to behave yourself.
Yeah, stay off the radar.
You got to play by their rules.
Yeah, and he was a very smart guy, because I don't know if our viewers know, but I mean, I've represented a few people that were pharmacists, and it is a very, very hard curriculum.
Oh my God!
It's as intense as a medical doctor.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable what those guys go through, and to pass and become a pharmacist is, so he was clearly a bright guy and a hell of an athlete. So I'm glad you were.
The funny thing is, we used to work up the case, work on the case. I would go up at the time he was living in the Orlando area, and we would play golf. And I'm not a particularly good golfer, as you know.
You're right.
And he would try to show me all these little pro tricks, like how to put backspin on the ball on the short shot to the green. And I basically was creating divots
They never.
all over the course.
They said you could never come back to that course.
It was horrible. It was horrible. But it was an interesting case.
I love that.
I know you got something for
Yeah, I do. And it's. I'm going to just tell you right up front, ladies and gentlemen, this is an extortion case. It's a very interesting extortion case, and it could be a case that we could do 10 hours on, but I'm going to try to put it into 20 minutes for everybody. So we're going to summarize, and I'm just going to start by setting the table here. So the client, not the client, there's a 65-year-old woman. Let's call her the employee. 65-year-old woman, employee. She has no criminal history. Again, I'm just going to set the table, run through some facts. This employee worked 40 years for a very, very high net worth family. They had homes in New York City. They had home in the Hamptons. They had other homes. This employee worked for this couple. We'll call them Mr. and Mrs. Jones. And the employee had an employment contract, and that employment contract had all the standard things you'd expect to see in it, such as a severance package and vacation time and so forth. So employee ran the homes. She was a personal assistant. She basically, to both Mr. and Mrs. Jones, she basically did it all, including they had a lot of staff at all their properties, so she supervised staff as well. And in her employment contract, she was supposed to work 6 days a week. But over the 40 years, there were many, 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 many times where she worked 7 days a week or 6.5 days. It was just a routine, regular thing, 7 days. But technically, she was only supposed to work 6. She almost never missed a day of work in 40 years. Like, almost, I would bet you could count on 2 hands how many days of work she missed in 40 years. And she worked overtime every single week. So she didn't work a 40-hour, 45, or 48-hour week. She worked overtime every week. And unfortunately, the Mr. and Mrs. Jones gave her very, very modest raises every year. And they gave her very modest holiday bonuses. So she wasn't treated well that way. But the way she was really not treated well, and this is the clinch pin here, is that Mr. Jones, relentlessly over the 40 years, was extremely handsy and sexually inappropriate with employee. Crossed the line almost on a daily basis with employee. But employee was uneducated and this was a good job for her, and it was a reliable job, and she stuck with it all these years, never said a word, except when she would go home, she'd talk to her daughter about it. So employee has a daughter, we're going to call her Amy. Amy's father passed away when Amy was an infant, so she was really raised by employee. And employee would share with Amy what was going on, and it was obviously very upsetting to Amy, but she wasn't in any position to do anything about it. But when Amy got into high school, Amy started going to work with her mom on the weekends, and she would sit there and she would actually sit at the kitchen table while her mom worked, and Amy would do her homework. And this went on for many years while she was in high school on the weekends. So one day, Mrs. Jones comes into the kitchen and she says to Amy, why are you here? Why do you come on the weekends? You're a young high school kid. Why aren't you out playing with your friends or, going to the beach, things like that? That you have we're at our Hamptons home. You can go there. You're in the city. You can go down to, wherever you want, Times Square, Broadway. Like, why do you keep coming here? So Amy opened up to her and she said, I'm here because your husband is very inappropriate with my mom, and I'm here to protect my mom from him. And that's why I come in all the time. Mrs. Jones turns to Amy and says, wait right here, give me a moment, I'll be right back. So Mrs. Jones then comes back a few minutes later. She hands Amy a book, and she says, Amy, don't look at it now, but when you get home tonight, I want you to look at this, and I want you to keep this. That's key to this case, by the way. You can have this book and keep it. I don't want it back. Don't ever bring it back to me. So Amy says, okay, and she follows the instructions. She doesn't look at it. And then when she gets home that night, she looks at the book, and she sees that it's a handwritten diary by Mrs. Jones. And the diary goes all the way back to the year that Mr. and Mrs. Jones got married. And in the handwriting of Mrs. Jones, she writes about all these sexually inappropriate things that Mr. Jones has done throughout their life.
On her or everybody?
On other women. And there have been a number of victims that have been paid to settle claims against Mr. Jones and basically been paid off, right? And so Amy holds on to that. She doesn't do anything about it. She now graduates high school. She goes to college, graduates college with honors, and she's now getting an MBA. So she's in graduate school, really good grades. And she happens to be home visiting for a little holiday, a school break from graduate school. And her mom comes home on a Friday night from work about 7:30 p.m. And she's crying. And she says, what's wrong, Mom? And she says, I'm on my way home from work, 40 years into her job. On my way home from work, I get a call from Mr. and Mrs. Jones' home office, their corporate office. And they tell me, you're fired. Don't come back to work. You're terminated. We don't need your services anymore. And Amy's mom asks, well, why? And they said, no, we're not giving you an explanation. We don't have to give you an explanation, but you're fired. And she's telling Amy this, and they're in shock. They're total shock. And Amy, being a very smart, young woman, academically, experienced and so forth, she's upset, and she's like, I'm going to do something about this. So she calls some of the family members, because she basically grew up with them, and they said, well, we're not giving any explanation, we're not giving any reason. And Amy says, well, what about the severance? She said, no, we're not giving her any severance either. And she said, well, you contractually have an employment contract with her, you have to pay her severance. She said, well, we're not doing any of that. She said, well, you have no basis for the firing, we're not going to answer that, we're not explaining anything. And she knew there was no basis. Her mom was the most diligent, loyal, hardworking person. Again, hardly missed a day of work and so forth, never breached any confidentiality outside of the house, the family and so forth. So Amy sat on it for a day or two and was very upset, as you can imagine. Her mom was very upset. So she calls back to one of the family members, and she says, look, many years ago, when I was in high school, your mom handed me a diary, handwritten diary. It says a lot of things that are very incriminating and not favorable toward Mr. Jones. And we now need to find a job. We need income. I'm in school. My mom's my sole provider, and we have no way to survive. You're not giving her severance. You didn't hardly ever pay her a bonus. She's almost making the same salary she made today that she made 40 years ago. And so we'd like you to buy the diary from us. We're willing to sell it to you. And the family says, well, that sounds reasonable. And by the way, this is very important too. Amy says, but you don't have to buy it. If you don't, I'm going to go ahead and sell it to a media outlet. I'm sure I haven't contacted anybody yet, just so that's clear. But if you don't want to buy it, we need to survive financially. And, you're a high-profile family, and we're going to sell it to a media outlet or see if they'd be interested in buying it. So the family member said, well, let me talk with our legal counsel because this sounds reasonable, and they'll set up, to meet you and talk to you about it and purchase it from you and so forth. And they said, okay. And Amy says, well, I'd like to meet them at a Starbucks, a nice neutral location. And so the family member says, that shouldn't be a problem. So a few days later, Amy gets a call from their lawyer, the family's lawyer, and they go to meet at a Starbucks. And during the meeting, the lawyer asks her, tell me really what's in that. Before you hand it to me, can you summarize what's in there and what your intentions are? So she goes through and says how Mr. Jones, did this to this woman, did that to that woman, did this to this employee, did this to this other employee, that this was a private settlement, that Mrs. Jones would cry every night, couldn't believe it. She'd beg him to stop doing it. The marriage was on the rocks for years. She begged him to go to therapy. He didn't go to therapy, all those types of things, right? And he said, well, this is obviously very damaging, the lawyer says. We certainly don't want that out there. He says, well, if you don't buy it, I'm going to sell it to a media outlet. So he says, all right, well, how much would you like for this? And again, as I said earlier, we can't make this shit up. This moment was like in a Hollywood movie. The moment in the movie where someone takes a piece of paper, Amy, face down, a piece of paper, face down, slides it across the table to the lawyer. He turns it over and he says $4 million on it.
Wow.
She wants $4 million. Very wealthy family.
Wow.
40 years of abuse her mom had taken. Amy, who again, was really, really upset about this because she lived with it with her mom all these years. So it really was a Hollywood moment. Well, the lawyer now turns to Amy and says, as he says this to her, Amy sees 4 police officers come from behind the scenes, and he says, I'm an undercover police officer. You are now under arrest for extortion.
Wow.
And they arrest Amy immediately on the spot at Starbucks and take her out in handcuffs. The next day, her mom comes into my office. She tells me this whole story, and from beginning to end, like I just shared with our viewers and listeners. And I don't know the family, Mr. and Mrs. Jones. I've never heard of them. So I say to her, because I'm almost in tears myself. So I say to employee, I say, I'm going to do this pro bono for you. I feel so bad for what your daughter's going through, what you're going through all these years, and now you're out of employment. And as our viewers know, because we've talked about before, pro bono means for free. Right. We're going to do it for free. We're going to represent you for free. And we give 110% as if you're paying us $1 million to handle your case. Get the same representation. And the next day, I go to visit Amy in the jail. And Amy says to me, she says, I've never shown the diary to anybody. I've never made copies of the diary. All I want to do is give the diary back. She actually didn't have it with her at that Starbucks meeting, which was interesting. So the government didn't have it. But she says, I want to give the diary back. I'll apologize. I'll swear under oath that I've never shown it to anybody, and I'll never talk about this ever again. And I said, well, that's great. So let me go talk to the prosecutor. So the next day or day after, whatever, within a week of the arrest, I'm in the prosecutor's office. And I tell them all about Amy's background, how credible she is, her 4.0 in college, her graduate school, which was also like a 3.9, her mom's abuse all the years. And I document everything to them. And they believe me. We have great credibility when we go before a judge or a prosecutor. They know who we are. Our reputation, precedes us. So they knew I wasn't bluffing or puffing or misrepresenting anything, that I was speaking the truth. And they felt for the case, very much so. And I said, all we want is let us turn everything over. She'll put under oath that she hasn't shown it to anybody. Give us a diversion. There needs to be a consequence. Give us, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years.
Explain to our listeners what a diversion is.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Mark, because it's important. There's certain programs the government will offer to a first-time offender, and Amy had no criminal history, and where there are different names for it: pretrial intervention, PTI, diversion, deferred prosecution. They basically all mean the same thing.
It's in the state system.
Yeah, the state system.
Florida.
You can occasionally, but very, very rarely, get it in federal court.
In federal court there are different programs, and we can talk about that at another time.
Yeah.
But basically, they are rarities.
Yep, and the outcome is the charges get dismissed. So essentially, you go on like a probation. It feels and looks just like probation. You have to jump through some hoops. You have to behave. Most importantly, you have to stay out of trouble. And you have to complete the terms and conditions. And if you do everything successfully, the charges get dismissed at the end. That's diversion. So I said, that's what we're asking for. So the prosecutor said, that doesn't seem unreasonable with everything you're representing to me. Well, here's the problem. The Jones have a big family business company and so forth. They're very successful. So they have civil counsel, a big law firm that's been representing them for years. And there's exceptions to every rule. There's great criminal defense lawyers. There's bad criminal defense lawyers. There's also great civil lawyers and bad civil lawyers. Well, in this case, unfortunately, the lawyers that got involved were selfish, out for themselves civil lawyers. And what happened is, they go to the prosecutor and say, we are representing the Jones as a victim advocate on their behalf, as officers of the court and so forth, and we want this woman prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Don't give her a break, not even a day off the maximum sentence. So they want her to go to prison for the maximum sentence, and they're not going to accept anything less. And so as a result, I now, on the defense side, have to litigate this case, and it goes on for about 3 years. Probably spent, 5,000 hours defending this case, hearing after motion, back and forth to court. The victim, and we've talked in the past about victims' rights and so forth, but in this case, this was a big law firm, big civil law firm. They had a lot of juice, and the prosecutor listened to them. The prosecutor didn't step back and say, I wish the prosecutor would step back like it should have and said, look, attorney so-and-so, I hear you, but in criminal court, that's not the appropriate outcome for this case. But they didn't. They caved.
It's interesting because I've encountered cases where there's the potential or the actuality of a civil suit against the defendant, usually in cases where they feel there's money they can gain because the defendant has money or there's some other form of coverage or family or whatever. In those situations, prosecutors, if they smell that they're being used as a tool to assist the victim and the lawyers in making a lot of money, they won't allow themselves. Good prosecutors won't allow themselves. They'll say civil process goes on its own. We're here to deal with the justice system.
Exactly. And in this case, though, the victim, well, not the victim, the defendant and her mother had no resources. They were basically they were broke.
So what are they going to get?
So they weren't going to sue them. But the prosecutor wasn't sophisticated to see the big picture, which I'll get to in a minute. So unfortunately, we have to go to trial. We had no choice but to go to trial. It wasn't a long trial. It was about 3 days, about 3/4 of a day to pick a jury, and then like two and a quarter days of testimony and closing argument and so forth. And really, we had no defense because we had this undercover cop who was allegedly a lawyer, had everything recorded. And it was on video, and it was on of audio and video recording, and it was because he was was an undercover thing. He asked the right questions to walk Amy right into an extortion claim, and it was airtight. I mean, it was just there was no way to break it, but we had no choice. No one is ever going to take a maximum plea offer. You might as well roll the dice because maybe you get found guilty and the judge gives you less.
The judge hears all the facts of the case. Sometimes that's like an argument in mitigation. And you wind up with a favorable sentence if you're convicted.
Right.
And then you always have the potential of what we call jury nullification.
That's right. There's always a chance. So why would any defendant ever take a maximum plea offer? Sometimes we see that in like a high-profile case where the government doesn't want to look like they're soft because then everyone in the news in the community is going to see that
especially in these high-profile cases.
Right. Yeah.
They have no choice.
That's right. So we had no choice in this case. No one's going to accept a maximum plea offer. So we went to trial. Unfortunately, we got a guilty verdict that we were buried by that. That it was over 20 minutes of audio where she was just unfortunately talking, and Amy just talked herself right into this conviction. So, okay, now how do we have to deal with it? And you just pointed out, judges can hear all the facts. They may sentence you less and so forth, maybe a jury nullification, but we did get the guilty verdict. So we go to sentencing, and ladies and gentlemen, what happens at sentencing is victims get to testify and officers testify a lot, but the defense also gets to put people on. In this case, the first witnesses the government puts on are Mr. and Mrs. Jones. And they get up there and they say, Her mother, employee, was a lovely woman, very devoted employee for 40 years. And Amy, who spent many, many hours at their home over the years, who they really knew, she was friends with their children over the years, is a lovely, smart, wonderful young woman. And they don't want her to go to jail. They don't want a conviction on her record. They're like, all we want is for her to give us our diary back and to admit under oath that she never showed it to anybody else and didn't make any copies of it. I then get up in front of the judge and pull out an email from 2 or 3 years earlier when this case first happened, several days after the arrest, after I met with the prosecutor, confirming that I just met with you, Madam Prosecutor, and presented this to you. We will return the diary. We will affirm under oath that it's never been shown to anybody. We will affirm under oath that no copies were ever made, and we would like a diversion so she doesn't have a conviction or go to jail. The judge couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it.
Wasted his time and members of the community who sat as jurors.
Right. He turns to the civil attorneys who have shown up at every single hearing. There were probably 40, 50 hearings plus the trial. They were there for every hour of it. And says,
Billing, of course.
Attorneys, tell me, how much money did you make on this case? And they, of course, respond, Judge, that's a privileged communication. The judge on the record says, my prediction, if you're all at, say, $600 an hour, is that you're at least at $250,000 that you wasted of court time, this young woman's life. You wasted hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars just to fill your pockets with money when from day one, you knew the prosecutor had represented, yes, Judge, we conveyed that to the attorney advocate for the Jones family. They knew from day one that was the offer, but all they wanted to do was fill their pockets with money. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And as you pointed out, the resources of the court, jury had to be inconvenienced, the clerk of court, everybody. And so at the end of the day, the client got exactly what we had asked for in the first week of this case. And the judge actually issued not an apology, but said, apologized that this process had to go on the way it did.
So did she wind up without a criminal conviction?
Yes, she wound up getting the diversion.
Fabulous,
yeah. But it was really frustrating because, I have respect for all lawyers, but the whole time I just couldn't believe that I knew that they had been told about the offer that I proposed to them. And I couldn't believe they were still asking for, for the maximum sentence. And I find out at the end of the day, those civil lawyers never conveyed it to Mr. and Mrs. Jones or their family.
But what's interesting, I find, is, theoretically, lawyers are supposed to work for the client and the client's interest. And at the end of the day, like I tell all my clients, I may give you advice. I'm going to lead you down a path, but it's your final decision. And if you tell me yes or no, I have to abide by it. I may try to talk you out of it. And in some instances where I feel you're on a death march, I may even resign from the case if you don't allow me to do the right thing for you. But at the end of the day, the lawyers have to follow the intentions of the client. So my question is, if Mr. and Mrs. Jones were so giving at the sentencing of their opinion from day one, which is we don't want to go to jail, we don't want to have a record, blah, blah, blah. Why did they not only allow the lawyers, but pay them all that money, whatever they paid them, to block the process?
I'll tell you why. And I took this case so personal. I looked into all of that. And I had as time went on, I realized I had a lot of connections to this family, and I was able to get some inside information. And it comes back to those lawyers. Those lawyers kept telling them, we're handling everything. They literally lied to them. They said, they're fighting this or fighting this or fighting this. They don't want to give anything back. And it actually infuriated the Joneses. And then they realized when it came to trial, we had the opportunity. I saw family members at court, and I spoke to them and told them about this. And they had no idea. Like, the lawyers fueled this fire. They kept the Joneses really out of everything except trust us. We've represented you for years. We've handled your estate planning. We've handled all the lawsuits that you've had with your companies defending and this and that. And trust us. And they kept telling the family that my client, Amy, was fighting this case, that she was furious and that she wasn't going to roll over for nothing. So they built up a lot of, anger toward her until they realized the truth. They obviously no longer use that law firm anymore, which is a good thing. But they realized that kind of it all came together at the end of that trial when they realized
Wow.
what the truth was.
You know, I'm surprised, given the situation and what you told us, the judge said at the sentencing, that the judge didn't make a bar complaint referral.
Right.
'Cause that would be a perfect example of lawyers stepping out of bounds.
I know. I felt there should have been a bar complaint, but I also knew that this was a very, very powerful civil law firm. A lot of influence. They had several retired elected officials at the firm. I think they just didn't want to go there. And I see that occasionally, you know. I saw a Florida bar president 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago that committed fraud in federal court. And they didn't want to file a bar complaint against her or punish her because she had a lot of influence. These things happen, unfortunately. People do sometimes, not always, get away because they have influence and power. So they got away with it. And I haven't really followed those lawyers, but hopefully it affected their practice.
Well, this is a fascinating story, but I don't know why. It made me think about a scenario that I want to ask you about, and any of the legal eagles out there in our audience want to chime in on this.
Yeah, please, text
by
us.
sending us something.
Yeah.
What if let's assume she made a copy of the diary and gave you a copy of the diary. And after the case was over, you decided you're not going to sell it. You're going to give it to a news media.
Right.
Let's say the Jones came in at the sentencing. I'm going to change the facts a little. The Jones came in at the sentencing wanting the maximum.
Right.
And now it's clear these people are, being unreasonable to the nth degree, because not only is Mr. Jones a predator, they now are going after her. And they fired the mother without any justification. What if you then just sent it on to a news media, even anonymously, but even if you used your own name, said, here, take a look at this. Would you have committed a crime at that point?
Well, even before a crime, am I committing an ethical violation under the Florida bar rules? Because certainly emotionally, that's exactly what I would have wanted to do. And I would say, thank God we have an 800 hotline to the Florida Bar and the American Bar Association to run ethics issues by them.
Well, what if the client authorized you in writing
that would
do that?
Right. I would definitely want, because they gave it to me in the attorney-client privilege communication.
So authorized in writing. And now, let's say it's even in the hands, there's a copy in the hands of the prosecutor. Case is over, so it's no longer evidence.
Oh, and I think what's key to your question is the Jones never ever alleged that the diary was stolen.
Right.
It was actually affirmed that Miss Jones affirmed that, yes, I gave it to her and told her that she can keep it and I never want it back.
Well, we have another episode that you're going to do later on about that whole issue in a very high-profile situation, but we'll let our listeners
await
for that.
Yes. So.
But it's a fascinating case. Guy, it's amazing. People think that when criminal lawyers are the most successful is when they win a case at trial. But the reality is conviction rates, especially in federal court, are in the 90-something% range. Sometimes you do your best work in working out something, getting justice for your client, no incarceration. In this case, no incarceration and no record of conviction. And sometimes, I know in my practice, I've represented some very, very high-profile people that I can't talk. I'd love to be able to talk about, make me sound like a big shot.
Yes.
But the truth is, protecting their reputation, their anonymity, requires me not to talk about in cases that never became cases.
That's right. Yes.
That's where we do our best work sometimes, in cases that never became cases.
Yeah, and clients will often ask us when they're interviewing us, well, what's your success record on handling a case like this? And I said, well, it depends how you define success.
Right.
Yeah, as far as the number of those cases that went to trial, guilty versus not guilty, or the large percentage of them where they were looking at 15, 20 years in prison, and I resolved them with a probation offer, to me, that's a success. So we really have to go deep. So when answering that question, when prospective clients ask us during the interview process of whether to hire us or not, we have to kind of really go into depth and explanation, like you just said. The pre-trial negotiation can often be our greatest success, and especially when they're under investigation, we can make a heck of a lot more money if they actually get charged. That's where we really make bigger fees. But in this case, we often do our best work during investigation, pre-charging, and as a result, they may not get charged, and we do what's in their best interest. And it's certainly great for us, for our career, but it's not cases that we can ever talk about. And financially, it's not in our benefit, but we're obligated, and we take it very seriously, to always do what's in our client's best interest.
You're right.
Yep. So based on that, I think another good show for you and me, Mark, on You're Free to Go. And I guess we'll kind of close out now to the next episode. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in today. And until next time, you're free to go. Down Low Investigations is a sponsor of You're Free to Go. Behind every great criminal defense attorney is a great private investigator. That's why Mark and I use Down Low to investigate cases all over the country. Down Low can help you too, whether you're running a background check on an employee or running a background check on a blind date, or let's say you need someone followed or some other type of investigative work conducted. Down Low is the way to go. Call Download Investigations at 561-843-1806. Everything expressed and discussed in this episode are the opinions and experiences of attorneys Guy Fronstin and Mark Nurik and their guests. All ethical rules are complied with. Attorney-client privilege and confidential information is not shared or released during these episodes, and names, dates, locations, and other identifying information may be changed to protect confidentiality. Topics are embellished, and none of the statements made constitute legal advice and should not be considered or relied on as such.